Hi, boys and girls. So, as promised, we are going to start reading our first chapter book called Charlotte's Web. And this is one of my favorite books. In fact, when I was younger, in about third grade, I played the part of the sheep right there in a play that I did with my class. So, now a chapter book, as you might already know, but in case you don't, is a book that has chapters in it that look like this. So here you can see all the chapters and all the names and the pages that the chapters start on. So there are a lot. There are 22 chapters in this book. So I mean, some are short, some are long. So we're going to read through them, and I'll probably do a few at a time because it takes some time to get through them. Now, not every page has a picture. So sometimes you'll just be listening to me reading, and then anytime there's a picture, I'll flip it over and show it to you. This is by a very special author named E.B. White. See it there? E.B. White. And here's the inside. There we go. You might know this story already if you've heard it. Mrs. McAdams loves to do the different voices. There's lots of different characters in this, so you might hear me changing my voice a little bit for some of the characters. Okay? All right. So sometimes chapters just have numbers, and sometimes they have titles. This one has both. So here you can see how it starts. So chapter 1 is called Before Breakfast. And you can see on this first page, it's just words to start, right? And then as we go through, some of those pages will have pictures. Okay, so we'll just be listening quietly. All right, everybody find a comfortable place to sit. I like to sit in a comfortable chair. I've got my feet up on a stool right now. Here they are, with my nice soft pillow. So, all right, everybody ready? This is Charlotte's Web. "Where's Papa going with that axe?" asked Fern to her mother as they were setting the table for breakfast. "Out to the hog house," replied Mrs. Arable. "Some pigs were born last night." "I don't see why he needs an axe," continued Fern, who was only 8 years old. "Well," said her mother, "one of the pigs is a runt. It's very small and weak, and it will never amount to anything. So your father has decided to do away with it." "Do away with it?" shrieked Fern. "You mean kill it just 'cause it's smaller than the others?" Mrs. Arable put a pitcher of cream on the table. "Now don't yell, Fern," she said. "Your father is right. The pig would probably die anyway." Fern pushed a chair out of her way and ran outdoors. The grass was wet and the earth smelled like springtime. Fern's sneakers were sopping wet by the time she caught up with her father. "Papa, please don't kill it," she sobbed. "That's so unfair." Mr. Arable stopped walking. "Fern," he said gently, "you will have to learn to control yourself." "Control myself?" yelled Fern. "This is a matter of life and death, and you talk about controlling myself?" Tears ran down her cheeks as she took hold of the axe and tried to pull it out of her father's hands. Here's the picture. Okay, there's Fern, right, and there's her father. See that? Okay. "Fern," said Mr. Arable, "I know more about raising a litter of pigs than you do. A weakling makes trouble. Now run along." "But it's unfair," she cried. "The pig couldn't help being born small, could it? If I had been small at birth, would you have done this to me?" "Oh, certainly not," smiled Mr. Arable, looking down at his daughter with love. "But this is different. A little girl is one thing, but a runty little pig is another." "I see no difference," replied Fern, still hanging on to the axe. "This is the most terrible case of injustice I've ever heard of." A strange look came over Mr. Arable's face. He seemed almost ready to cry himself. "All right," he said. "You go back to the house, and I will bring the runt when I come in. I'll let you start the runt on a bottle, like a baby, and then you'll see how much trouble a pig can be." When Mr. Arable returned to the house half an hour later, he carried a carton under one arm. Fern was upstairs changing her wet sneakers. The kitchen table was set for breakfast, and the room smelled like coffee, bacon, damp plaster, and wood smoke from the stove. "Put it on her chair," said Mrs. Arable. Mr. Arable set the carton down at Fern's place. Then he walked to the sink, washed his hands, and dried them on a paper towel. Fern came slowly down the stairs. Her eyes were red from crying. As she approached her chair, the carton wobbled, and there was a scratching noise. Fern looked at her father. Then she lifted the lid of the carton, and there inside, looking up at her, was a newborn pig. It was a white one. The morning light shone through its ears, turning them pink. "He's yours," said Mr. Arable, "saved from an untimely death. May the good Lord forgive me for this foolishness." Fern could not take her eyes off of the tiny pig. "Oh," she whispered, "oh, look at him. He's absolutely perfect." She closed the carton carefully. First she kissed her father, then she kissed her mother, then she opened the lid again, lifted the pig out, and held it up to her cheek. At this moment, her brother Avery came into the room. Avery was 10, and he was heavily armed. "What's that?" he demanded. "What's Fern got?" "She has a guest for breakfast," said Mrs. Arable. "Wash your face and hands, Avery." "Let's see it," he said. "You call that miserable thing a pig? That's a fine specimen of a pig. It's no bigger than a white rat." "Now wash up and eat your breakfast, Avery," said his mother. "The school bus will be along in half an hour." "Can I have a pig too, Pop?" asked Avery. "No," said Mr. Arable. "I only distribute pigs to early risers." Fern was up at daylight, trying to rid the world of injustice. As a result, she now has a pig. It just shows what can happen if a person gets out of bed promptly. Now let's eat. But Fern couldn't eat until her pig had a drink of milk. Mrs. Arable found a baby's nursing bottle and a little rubber top. She poured warm milk into the bottle, fitted it on the top, and handed it to Fern. "Give him his breakfast," she said. A minute later, Fern was seated on the floor in the corner of the kitchen with her little pig between her knees, teaching it to drink from the bottle. The pig, although tiny, had a good appetite and caught on quickly. There's the picture. There's Fern, and then the little pig. Isn't he cute? She's going to give him a name here pretty soon. Okay. The school bus suddenly honked from the road. "Run," said Mrs. Arable, taking the pig from Fern and slipping a donut into her hand. Avery grabbed another donut. The children ran out to the road and climbed onto the bus. Fern took no notice of the others on the bus. She just sat and stared out the window, thinking what a blissful world it was and how lucky she was to have entire charge of her own pig. By the time the bus reached school, Fern had a pet name, selected the most beautiful name she could think of. "Its name is Wilbur," she whispered to herself. She was still thinking about the pig when the teacher said, "Fern, what's the capital of Pennsylvania?" "Wilbur," she replied dreamily. Everyone giggled, and Fern blushed. Okay, so that's the end of chapter 1. And here's how we know when we turn the page. Watch what happens. Okay, so here we go. Chapter 2 is called Wilbur. And I'll show you the picture ahead of time before I start to read. Here's the picture at the beginning of this chapter. This one's called Wilbur. So it tells us we're going to meet our little pig friend and learn some more about him. Okay? Fern loved Wilbur more than anything. She loved to stroke him, to feed him, and to put him to bed. Every morning, as soon as she got up, she warmed his milk, tied his bib on, and held the bottle for him. And every afternoon, when the school bus came in front of her house, she jumped out and ran to the kitchen to fix him another bottle. She fed him again at supper time and just before going to bed. Mrs. Arable gave him a feeding at noontime each day when Fern was at school. Wilbur loved his milk, and he was never happier than when Fern was warming up a bottle for him. He would stand and gaze up at her with adoring eyes. For the first few days of life, Wilbur was allowed to live in the box near the stove in the kitchen. Then Mrs. Arable complained he was moved to a bigger box in the woodshed. At 2 weeks of age, he was moved outdoors. It was apple blossom time, and the days were getting warmer. Mr. Arable fixed a special yard just for Wilbur under the apple tree and gave him a large wooden box full of straw with a doorway cut in it so he could walk in and out as he pleased. "Won't he be cold at night?" asked Fern. "No," said her father. "You watch and see what he does." Carrying a bottle of milk, Fern sat down under the apple tree inside the yard. Wilbur ran to her, and she held the bottle for him while he drank. When he had finished the last drop, he grunted and walked sleepily into the box. Fern peeked through the door. Wilbur was poking at the straw with his snout. In a short time, he had dug a tunnel under the straw. He crawled into the tunnel and disappeared from sight, completely covered in the straw. Fern was enchanted. It relieved her mind to know that her baby would sleep covered up and would stay warm. And that's the picture I had just shown you. So that's Wilbur's home outside. Right? See the little door? There's where he goes in, covers himself with the straw so he can sleep. Every morning after breakfast, Wilbur walked out to the road with Fern and waited with her until the bus came. She would wave goodbye to him, and he would stand and watch the bus until it vanished around the corner. While Fern was in school, Wilbur was closed up inside his yard, but as soon as she got home in the afternoon, she would take him out, and he would follow her all around the place. If she went into the house, Wilbur went too. If she went upstairs, Wilbur would wait at the bottom of the step until she came down again. It's a little bit like a puppy, isn't it, boys and girls? Or a kitten. Sometime, if she took her doll for a walk in the doll carriage, Wilbur followed along. Sometimes on these journeys, Wilbur would get tired, and Fern would pick him up and put him in the carriage alongside of the doll. He liked this. When he was very tired, he would close his eyes and go to sleep under the doll's blanket. He looked cute when his eyes were closed because his lashes were so long. The doll would close her eyes too, and Fern would wheel the carriage very slowly and smoothly so as not to wake her little infants. Here's a picture of Wilbur in the carriage. Isn't that cute? One warm afternoon, Fern and Avery put on bathing suits and went down to the stream for a swim. Wilbur tagged along at Fern's heels. When she waded into the stream, Wilbur waded in with her. Ooh! He found the water quite cold, too cold for his liking. So while the children swam and played and splashed water at each other, Wilbur amused himself in the mud along the edge of the brook. It was warm and moist and delightfully sticky and oozy. Every day was a happy day, and every night was peaceful. Wilbur was what farmers called a spring pig, which simply means he was born in the springtime. When he was 5 weeks old, Mr. Arable said he was now big enough to sell and would have to be sold. Fern broke down and cried, but her father was firm. Wilbur's appetite had increased, and he was beginning to eat scraps of food in addition to milk. Mr. Arable was not willing to provide for him any longer. He had already sold Wilbur's 10 brothers and sisters. "He's got to go, Fern," he said, "but you have had your fun raising a baby pig, but Wilbur's not a baby anymore, and he has to be sold." "Call up the Zuckermans," said Mrs. Arable. "Your Uncle Homer sometimes raises a pig, and if Wilbur goes to live there, you could walk down the road and visit as often as you'd like." "How much money should I ask for him?" Fern said. "Well," said her father, "he is a runt," and a runt is the smallest animal in a litter, so the smallest puppy or the smallest pig or the smallest kitten. "Tell your Uncle Homer you've got a pig you'll sell for $6, and let's see what he says." It was soon arranged. Fern phoned and got her Aunt Edith, and her Aunt Edith hollered for Uncle Homer, and Uncle Homer came in from the barn and talked to Fern. When he heard that the price was only $6, he said he would buy the pig. The next day, Wilbur was taken from his home under the apple tree and went to live in the manure pile in the cellar of the Zuckerman's barn. All right, that's the end of chapter 2. See if we can tell. And here's chapter 3. Chapter 3 is called Escape. So you'll have to tune in next time to find out what happens in chapter 3, Escape.